So I just finished Night of Knives by E.N.C. Esslemont, and I think that this should be promoted as the gateway into the Malazan world, and I'll explain why I think that in a second. But just for context, I read this maybe 8 years ago. It was just before I started keeping track of what I was reading. And I read the entirety of Erikson and Esslemont in publication order. So, like, I started with Gardens of the Moon and interspersed Book of the Fallen with Esslemont's novels as they were published. And then later, I went back and reread the Book of the Fallen just on its own. So I've read that twice, but I've only read these once. So this is my reread of the novels of the Malazan Empire. And yeah, I think this should be promoted as the book to start Malazan with, not Gardens of the Moon. And I think one of the problems with Gardens of the Moon, people say that it's hard to get into because you're thrown into the world and not much is explained about the world. Whereas in this book, it's very not condensed, but constricted. Spatially and temporally, the whole thing takes place basically in Malaz City, and over the course of one night. So it's one night in Malaz City, and it's a shorter book. It's only 300 pages, just short compared to the other Books of the Fallen and other novels. But it also presents, it does a better job, I think, of presenting the world and the stuff in the world for a first-time reader. And it covers a lot, and I don't know if I'm only picking up on this because I have prior knowledge of the world, but I mean, there's talk of Jagkut, there's talk of not the Azath houses, but Dead House is a major set piece in this, and sort of you get a hint of what Azath houses are, so that once you have the name Azath House in a later book, you can be like, oh yes, that's the Dead House, I know all about this. Warren travel, how Warrens are worlds, planes unto themselves, also a way to traverse from location to location, but also ways to draw magic from. The different Warrens, Hood's Path, Hood, the Denewal healing Warrens mentioned, Thyr, Omtos Falak, so Elder Warrens, even though they're not mentioned as Elder Warrens. Jagkut, there's a Jagkut in this book. Talanamas are mentioned. I think one of the funniest lines is, I think it's Lubbin says to Temper, you look like a Talanamas reject after the battle when Temper's all beat up. I thought that was funny. So there's mention of all these things, which I don't know, maybe that's not a good introduction. Maybe it's just because I have this hindsight that I'm looking into all this thinking, oh yeah, wow, this is great. But they also like Moranth munitions. They explain Moranth alchemical munitions, basically explaining like, yeah, they're like grenades and bombs and stuff, and this is how they work. I think they just reference Sharper is the only one that's actually named, but and like the bridge burners are set up in this book and mentioned, and sort of like, whoa, the bridge burners, the Emperor, the Empire, the different campaigns in Seven Cities, Genabakis, Korol, they're all mentioned. So but again, I don't know if that's just because I know all this stuff. I'm like, oh, I'm picking up all this stuff, but I think it is. The way he writes is more accessible to a first-time reader of this world. And I'm not saying Gardens of the Moon is awful and so hard to get into, but a lot of people say it is. So I didn't have that issue, and I'm not saying everyone would. So yeah, the Claw, even the Talons, Kellenvid and Dancer. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but like, the fact that Kellenvid and Dancer become Shadowthrower and Cotillion, I think that's not really revealed until book 3 of the Book of the Fallen, whereas if you read this, it's clear as day, like at the end of it, Dancer is Cotillion. But I don't want to get into why I think spoilers don't matter, but in a good book, spoilers don't matter. You can have the ending spoiled, and if it's a good book, it's a good book. What else does this have? Like I said, the bridge burners, the army. There's a really interesting, which I never picked up on in my first read, but we get a POV from the siege of Ygatan and the breaking of the sword and the fall of Decim Ultor, which is like mythological levels of importance in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, to the Malazan world, to the Malazan Empire. Like Ygatan, this like cursed city where Dasim Ultor, the first sword of the Empire, the greatest champion, hero, warrior, whatever, fell, and we actually see that happen in this book. Through the POV of Temper, and it's really cool being like a long-term fan, actually seeing it through Temper's eyes. So that's really cool. And it's kind of hinted that he writes it really well. Like, does Dasim die? Does he not die? Even with the POV, it's like revealed that Dasim survives the battle, but then later on it's like, well, he dies. Someone says he dies, and someone says he doesn't die, and it's kind of up in the air. Like, is Dasim alive or dead? Of course, if you read Return of the Crimson Guard, which I think I'll read next, the second book by Esslemont, that you'll have that reveal. And that's another reveal, and that's another sort of a spoiler. I think that's a bigger spoiler for the Book of the Fallen, is the identity of a traveler, which I'm trying to think, because it was a twist for me, and I had read, I mean, it's publication order, so I'm not sure where Return of the Crimson Guard falls in terms of Book of the Fallen publication. Anyways, I'm getting way off track. So this book, Night of Knives, it follows one night when there's a shadow moon, this thing that happens sort of twice a century roughly, where there is a convergence between the shadow realm and our world, we'll say. The main world of the characters. Now, the shadow realm, did they call it the shadow realm? The shadow world? It's, they don't explain it, but from my understanding, it's a fragment of Kurald Emerlin that, because Kurald Emerlin's been shattered, this fragment's sort of floating around in respect to our world, and a shadow moon happens when the two cross over, and there's sort of a mixture, and you walk between worlds, and the barriers between the worlds are not there, or are semi-permeable. And so this happens once every 2 years, because it must be a rhythmic sort of thing, or sorry, twice a century. Anyways, doesn't matter. And this happens on Malaz Island. So that's one of the plot things, is that there's this convergence, and because of this blending of our world and the shadow world, Kellenvid and Dancer are this is the end of their path to ascendancy. They're going to use this to ascend to godhood, to take over the realm of shadow, and become what they become later in the series. So this is very much the culmination of the Path to Ascendancy novels that Esslemont is currently writing. But we do see Dancer, and we do see Shadow Kellenvid, but they're not the main characters at all. We see them like once, maybe at the end. But that's one thing that's happening. Another thing that's happening, a bigger threat, is the Storm Riders. So Esslemont loves to write about the Storm Riders. We get a lot about the Storm Riders in this book. The Storm Riders are attacking Malaz Island. They're heading towards Malaz Island in force, in order to, and initially it's thought that they want to take over and destroy Malaz Island so they can be free from this strait that they're trapped in, and can go out into all seas. But then it's later revealed that, wait, maybe they just want the Dead House because of the power of the Dead House, and they want to use that for some nefarious purpose. So yeah, the Storm Riders, which are these, they're hinted that they have a connection to the Jagut, because the Storm Riders are they're like mermen and mermaids, but ice aspected, and use a lot of ice magic, which of course the Jagut also do. But it's sort of hinted that the Jagut summoned them from another world, like crippled god Camisod levels of another world. They're not like beings from Amtos Flak. The Jagut are from Amtos Flak. See, I'm going way off. If you haven't read the series, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, so there's these Storm Riders guys. They're trying to attack the island, and they're attacking it because it's weakened because it's during a shadow moon, but also Surly, the regent, who's been in charge of the empire since Kellenvid and Dancer sort of went off to try and ascend X amount of years ago, She had had a pogrom killing off all mages on the island, which I believe is the prologue in Gardens of the Moon. We see that. And so Malaz Island has been sort of stripped of all its talent, magical talents, and so the riders see it as being weak, and so they're going to attack it. And this is sort of the big main threat of the book. However, big as in scale of importance, but not big as in take up much page time. We don't really see it that much. So these riders are attacking the island, and Agela, who is this sort of witch sort of person who has this shop and sells like witchy stuff, she is going out to defend the island because they only have her, and also Obo, this sort of wizard who has this like wizard's tower, but he has it sort of, he's very cut off from society. The tower looks like it's like destroyed and broken, but at one point one of the characters visits it and it's like fully rebuilt, because basically he's a wizard who has a secret wizard tower on this island, so he's also there helping. But initially there was this other wizard guy who rows out to sea and sort of stops them, holds them back long enough for Obo and Agela to do their best to try and stop them. But of course they also aren't enough, and so they need someone more powerful. They need more people to help them, and it just so happens that there's a certain Taishren, who I think must have been Esslemont, one of Esslemont's characters, that he either played or invented, because Esslemont writes a lot about Taishren, especially in, maybe it's just because I'm coming off of Forge of the High Mage, one of his other books, but Taishren's here. The High Mage of the Empire, like the number one chief wizard mage guy of the Empire, like fully trained, former priest of Drek, the Worm of Autumn, the like god of decay and rot, but also renewal, because it's a cycle. Rot leads to life, which leads to death, which leads to... Anyways, see, I could talk about Malazan forever. So we have Taishren showing up, and he, because he's super powerful, he's able to stop the Storm Riders, which seems like the big threat. So that's how the Storm Rider sort of part is dealt with. The other part is like I said, the path to ascendancy. Kellanvid and Dancer, the Emperor, I guess still the Emperor, and his chief assassin / best friend Dancer, trying to ascend, become immortals, ascend to godhood, and take over this realm of shadow, which has no rulers currently. And so they do this, but they do this by sort of not suicide, but there's a fight with Surly, who is acting as regent. She is the one in sort of running the empire while they've been gone, and Surly fights them. We don't see this. We see the immediate after effect, or the immediate aftermath. When we go into the room, Surly's there. The balcony's broken. She says, "Oh yes, so we fought them. They fell off the balcony and crashed into the ocean, and they're definitely gone." Taishren's like, "Oh yes, okay. Well, they're definitely gone. Wink, wink. We'll just agree that they're gone." And then Surly proclaims herself Empress. Takes on the name Lysine, and sort of sets up the later novels in that regard. So this is a very pivotal moment in the Malazan Empire. And we're also introduced to Otadral dust. So Otadral, the sort of the rust sort of colored dust that counteracts magic. So there's Otadral dust on the ground, and that was supposedly to counteract the magic of Kellanvid, who Kellanvid, the Emperor, was seen as like Taishren's number one wizard, but Kellanvid was like so much more, and that's how he like created this empire. Him and Dancer, his chief assassin. So because they're trying to get to ascendancy, there are these people, the Cult of Shadow, who are on the side of Dancer and Kellanvid and are trying to help them. I don't know if these are all Talons, which are Dancer's sort of League of Assassins that deal with assassin stuff, or if these are just people who worship Shadow and want Kellanvid and Dancer to ascend. So these shadow cultists are fighting the Claw, who are the assassins on the side of Surly, because Surly is, she's like an assassin of sorts. She's like your classic RPG monk. I imagine her. She's always described as being barefoot and wearing wraps and fighting like barehanded. Anyways, so yeah, so there's a big clash between the Claw and these shadow cultists. These like basically dark shadowy assassins killing each other throughout the streets. All the while that there's this convergence, so the Shadow Realm and our world are sort of one. And so there are the Hounds of Shadow. We're introduced to these massive hounds that live in shadow, but in this case come over to our world and then just would wreak havoc and kill lots of people. There are these people, this like bridge burner regiment that's there, that I'm not sure who they were working for. I think they were on the Emperor's side and fighting against Surly, but they basically get all wiped out except for one mage, Corin. And so that happens, and it all goes according to Kellanvid's plan, and they end up ascending, and we see in the epilogue that they are now masters of shadow, and it's sort of we're introduced to Edgewalker, this skeletal creature who lives in shadow, who literally walks the edge of it and just patrols the realm and has for millennia. And he sees these two people, Shadow Throne and Cotillion, Kellanvid and Dancer, showing up and taking over, and he's like, yeah, we'll see how this goes. Like, rulers for Shadow come and go. And it sort of sets so much of sense of scale, because we have Kellanvid and Dancer, this emperor and his assassin, who've created this vast empire, but their ambitions are even bigger. They want to become gods and rule the Shadow Realm. And they're like, whoa, that's so big. And then we have Edgewalker's perspective, who he's like, oh, I've been here for millennia. Now there's these new rulers to Shadow. Well, they'll sort of come and go. So there's this sense of time and scale, which Malaz does really well. Also, speaking of that, there is a Jagat who's described as being in all bronze armor. So, like, speaking of like time, like if we think of Malaz, the world of Malazan, I mean, there's no comparison. But if it's like medieval, like they've got steel and if it's not medieval, but I know it's weird because it's Iron Age because it's very Roman Empire, but it's medieval because we have alchemical Maranthe munitions, bombs, and gunpowder. Not quite gunpowder. But then we have this sort of Bronze Age character, this Jagat, this massive ancient being who lives in the Dead House or works for the Dead House but wants to escape. And so is trying to escape the Dead House, this like magical house where that is somehow linked to shadow and power, and that's how they use it to ascend. Anyways, so we have sort of the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and the medieval, and like at one point, the Jagat in their bronze armor brings Temper, which we'll get to the characters, brings Temper into Omtos Flak, the Jagat Warren, the Warren of Ice, this Elder Warren, or Hold, anyways, terminology. And we see the Dead House in that realm, and in that realm it's a megalithic structure. So we see almost a Neolithic age, like a very ancient age. So there's just so much time in these books, which I love. Anyway, so there's two sort of POV characters. It's very simple. I know it's not simple, the amount of stuff I've been saying, but if you've read these books, you know them. If you haven't read these books, this is a great introduction. Maybe not, because I know some of the stuff I'm saying. Our two characters are Kiska, who is this like stereotypical teenage girl who, oh man, I've been stuck on this island my whole life. I just want to get off and like go on an adventure. And she wants to become a claw. She wants to be an assassin. She's like fights with knives and runs on rooftops and stuff. So she's sort of our naive POV, where we see all these things happening through her, and she meets all these people, meets Taishren and is there when Surly describes how Kellanvid's dead and all this stuff. And her aunt is a Gala, this witch who goes off to fight the Storm Riders. So we get her POV. We also get the POV of Temper, who is an old grizzled veteran who turns out is a member of the Sword of Dasim Ultor. So Dasim Ultor is like the ultimate champion, the greatest swordsman that ever lived. that was the first sword of the Empire, the champion of the Empire, and he had his sword. These 5 bodyguards who would follow him around, and they were named Ferrule, Temper, Hilt, Point. I can't remember the other one, Guard maybe, like named after parts of the sword. And that's when we see the POV in Yigatan when the sword was broken, when they all get sort of smashed and defeated. And turns out it was Surly who was trying to orchestrate this, because she's sort of politicking and wanting to gain power, and Kellanvid's out of the picture and Dancer's out of the picture now, so she's trying to get rid of the old guard and sort of shore up her power base. So she has a part in the fall of Dasim Ultor and the sword. But of course Temper survives, because he's just like total tough shield wall that you throw anything at him, he's not going to break. So anyway, so he lives and escapes, and he's sort of living incognito in Malaz Island as just like a regular guardsman. And through the course of this book, he sort of gets involved in some of the stuff and fights some of the people. And at the end, we have this Jagat who's at the Dead House, and is trying to leave, and there are these 2 people who are the guardians of the Dead House who have to make sure nothing gets out of this Dead House. And there's like one guy who's this like really tough burly guy, and then this other guy who's like an old wizard, and they're both fighting and trying to keep this Jagat out. But they lose, they get killed, and Temper just happens to be there. And as the wizard's dying, he says, like, Temper, soldier, like, stand up, get it in line, fill the gap, we need you. So he says, I accept. So then Temper becomes the guardian of the Dead House and steps into the gap and fights the Jagat and keeps the Jagat from escaping the Dead House. And after he beats her, the Jagat gets like the vines from the Dead House yard reach up and grab her and pull her down into the yard with all the other beings that have been trapped in there for millennia. So we have the issue of the Dead House and its guardian and this Jagat trying to escape it. We have Surly and her fight with Kellanvid and Dancer and her ascension to Empress. We have Kellanvid and Dancer ascending to godhood, and we have the Storm Rider thing. So there is a lot in there, and like I know if you haven't read this book, what I just said makes no sense. But I think for people who have read this book, and I know it's so hard to recommend this series to people, not just because it's hard to get into, but people who love it as much as we do. You often don't want to recommend something to someone, because what if they don't like it? And it's something you love so much, you only want people to experience that will also love it. I don't know. Anyways, I think we should recommend starting with this book instead of Gardens of the Moon. If you start with this book, I'm really curious if anyone's ever read this book and then gone into the Malazan Book of the Fallen and read Gardens of the Moon. Would it make more sense? Would it not make more sense? But I think this is a great entry point into the world of Malaz. Whew. And like I said, it's so contained. It's literally one night in one city. Whereas you get into the Book of the Fallen and you're on various continents and different time periods and back and forth and hundreds of POVs. This is 2 POVs, although I guess we have an Agela point of view when she's fighting the Storm Riders. But anyways, and then the very end of it, I thought was very good. So these Storm Riders were like, we see them as these alien sort of ice mer people fighting. They're like the bad guys, right? But at the very end of it, one like wounded, dying one washes up on shore, and a guy goes out and sees it, and it speaks to him in one of the human languages from a different continent. But the guy can sort of get the gist of it, and the Storm Rider's asking, "Why do you keep killing us?" And it's just like, whoa. And then the guy bends down and slits its throat, and it says, "Red hot blood gushes out." So it's like these icy alien creatures are literally flesh and blood, and are so confused as to why everyone's trying to kill them. And it sort of twists the whole Storm Rider angle on its head, and it's like, well, who are these Storm Riders and what's their deal? Hopefully we'll find out more in, I think it's Stonewielder, which would be book 3. Yes, book 3 of the novels of the Malazan Empire by Ian C. Esslemont. So I'll probably go through and read the rest of his books because, like I said, it's been so long since I read this, and knowing what I know now about having all that knowledge of the entire series makes reading them so much more enjoyable. Not that it wasn't enjoyable the first time, but I think a really good book. It doesn't matter if you've been spoiled on it, if you know the ending. It's about the journey. It's about how you get there. It's about all the feelings and emotions and people you meet along the way. So yeah, so that's my pitch for the introduction to the Malazan world by Erickson and Esslemont.